is a 1989 Nissan Pathfinder, and it's very different from the modern Pathfinder. Today's new Pathfinder is a soft crossover with 3-row seating and leather upholstery and airbags. This thing was a truck, body on frame, old school two-door burly truck, and it reminds us what SUVs used to be. This is also probably the single nicest original Nissan Pathfinder in existence, and today I'm going to review it and show you all of its quirks and features. Before I get started, big news, this Pathfinder is currently for sale and it's being auctioned live on Cars and Bids. That's a big deal because this isn't just a nice early Pathfinder, this is the nicest early Pathfinder. 4-wheel drive, unmodified, but most importantly, just over 800 original miles from new. This is amazingly well preserved and you can buy it on Cars and Bids. So, once you finish watching this video, click the link in the description below to visit the live auction for this Pathfinder where you can bid on it and buy it only on Cars and Bids. All right, time for the quirks and features of a pristine, old-school Nissan Pathfinder. And I gotta start with some basics, some context why this is cool. So, SUVs really took off in the United States and globally in the early 90s. And here in North America, it was the Ford Explorer. It came out in 91 that started to be like the big catalyst for families to start buying SUVs instead of sedans, vans, station wagons, etc. But before the Explorer came out, there were other SUVs like the Jeep Cherokee, which was years before, and the Chevy Blazer and the Toyota 4Runner. And this is the original Nissan Pathfinder, and it debuted here in the States for the 1987 model year. And originally, it was basically just a Nissan pickup truck. It was called the Nissan Pickup here in the States, the hard body in some places, but a compact Nissan pickup truck that had simply been enclosed and given a full body as opposed to a pickup truck bed in back. And the result of that was, this was utilitarian. Unlike modern crossovers with their comfortable rides and their nice coddling interiors, this was a truck that just sort of barely became an SUV. It was basic, it was all about utility. And actually, converting a truck into an SUV is how a lot of SUVs got started. The original Toyota 4Runner was little more than a Toyota pickup with an enclosed rear. The same deal with the Chevy Blazer, which was a Chevy S10 with an enclosed rear, and even the early Ford Explorer was a Ford Ranger, except the rear end was enclosed. That's how these smaller mid-size SUVs got off the ground, just pickups with a body. Now, like a lot of its rivals, the Pathfinder was originally offered as a 2-door or a 4-door SUV. Obviously, this one is a 2-door. It's unthinkable in today's world that a mid-size SUV could offer a 2-door version. Imagine a 2-door Toyota Highlander, but that was pretty common back then, although the 2-door Pathfinder went away completely by 1990 and it never came back. Looking back on it, this was actually really smart of Nissan because other automakers tried to continue their 2-door SUVs like the Ford Explorer into the 90s and even the 2000s, but they were never popular and never strong sellers, and Nissan realized quickly that the 4-door was the way forward, and that's what they really committed to. As for interesting exterior quirks, I love the angular bar down the middle of the rear side window. You got the big glass back here and this little triangle window. It's kind of a ridiculous visual effect, this angled bar, but presumably it provided a little extra structural support since this had previously just been an open-air truck bed beneath it, and also because it created the small window, it gave rear passengers something to open for airflow and ventilation, which I'll show you in a little bit. Something else I love on the outside of this truck is the badging situation. Pathfinder is written on the front door in massive print that equals the size of a large stripe going down the entire side of the car. You don't get this from modern crossovers. I also love how there's a 4x4 badge mounted at the top middle of the body. This is not a fairly common badge placement location, but it is what they did here, old school badging. In the back, you had a giant plastic panel across the entire rear end that said in very large letters, both Nissan and Pathfinder. This was some of the late 80s badging that you could get away with. Certainly not done today. As for other exterior quirks, how about some of the really obvious nods to this vehicle's trucky nature? Take a look at the bumpers. You'll notice they're not integrated, and in fact, no effort was made to have them be form-fitting at all. They stick out like multiple inches with panel gaps and excess size beyond the body of the vehicle. Again, this was based on a truck. It was aimed at utilitarian truck buyers who maybe just wanted rear seats, and so beauty and comfort and really high level attention to detail wasn't their thought. Obviously you can see it in front too. The bumpers just kind of protrude and they're just left to hang there. Didn't really matter to the customers of this car. Same deal in back, where you can see the keyhole lock for the rear is just left sitting there exposed, as is the rear wiper. It just sort of sits on a little platform. They didn't try to disguise it at the top under the spoiler to make it look sleek in back like so many modern SUVs. They didn't have to. People just didn't care about that stuff in their SUVs in the 80s. These were trucky, brawny vehicles, and they weren't trying to look pretty. I love the fact that the wheels, obviously steel wheels, they chromed them to make them look a little nicer, but you can see in the front, the big advertisement for the front wheels is that they have automatic locking hubs. Prior to this, in a lot of four-wheel drive vehicles, you had to actually get out and lock the front hubs in order to fully go into four-wheel drive, which is insane by modern standards. You'd start to get stuck in the mud, then you'd get out, go into the sloppy mud, lock your front hubs, and then you were in four-wheel drive. This vehicle is advertising you didn't have to climb out of the car to put it in four-wheel drive. That was the big advertisement. That was luxury for the original Pathfinder. As for the powertrain, the only engine offered in the original Pathfinder in the States was a 3-liter V6, which again was a pretty smart and kind of forward-thinking decision by Nissan. Other rivals, including the 4Runner, tried to offer 4-cylinder engines, but Nissan correctly figured people weren't going to want that underpowered crap. They'd want the big old brawny V6, which actually wasn't that big old brawny. Only 155 horsepower from a 3-liter V6 and about 180 pound-feet of torque. It wasn't exactly a muscle engine, and it didn't really make the Pathfinder quick, but it was better than whatever 4-cylinder they could have possibly dreamt up. Now, you take a look at this engine bay, you can see this is unusually clean, obviously, for a Nissan Pathfinder from this era. Even the heat shield is like in perfect shape, never frayed or damaged, and that's because this is an unbelievably well-preserved car. Like I mentioned before, this one only has, as of right now, 857 miles on the odometer. That is from new, when this was sold back in 1987 as a new car in Pennsylvania. Apparently the story is the original owner bought it when it was new and drove it home from the dealer and used it a little bit after that, but then had an injury and couldn't use it as much or basically at all, but just sort of kept the car this entire time. Amazingly, this Pathfinder actually sold once before on Cars and Bids to the current owner, who had it for a few years, put on a few extra miles, and now is selling it again. And that gave me the chance to check out what has to be the most pristine first-generation Pathfinder left in existence. And that's especially true of the interior, which truly looks like a time capsule. You open the door and it is amazing just how perfect everything is in here. A lot of stuff is amazing, but I'm especially surprised by the upholstery, the carpeting. The seats look like they've never been sat in. It's truly incredible. So many of these old school Nissans, the foam is coming out of rips in the cushions. Not the case here. The carpets look like they've never been stepped on. They're incredibly unworn. The door panels are totally totally pristine. This is really amazing to see. But beyond the incredible condition, this car also gives us the chance, since it's never been modified or messed with, to really examine the quirks and features of the original Pathfinder, and there are quite a few. First off, the overall design of this interior, again, very boxy and blocky. You can see all of the dashboard is right angles for the climate vents, for the controls, the buttons, everything. No swoopy lines in here, no fake wood trim. This just wasn't aimed at people who wanted nice stuff. It was a utility vehicle, and the whole design of this interior clearly drives that point home. One quirk I absolutely love, you can see the gauge cluster here, and you can see its lovely orange color, which was actually pretty common for a lot of brands in this era. I love that in the center you have all of the warning lights, fuel, belts, and beam. There's an actual warning light with a diagram, and then there's a label describing it next to the warning light, which seems like a little overkill, particularly when you look at the one for the parking brake, where the warning light actually says brake on the light, but then the description next to it says brake a second time. So you have two different items there, just trying to make sure you understand this is the brake. Now, obviously, this gauge cluster is fully analog, although interestingly, there is a digital clock in here below the tachometer, which would have been kind of a nice luxury touch at the time. But anyway, on to some other odd labeling here. How about the steering column tilt lever? You can see it says on it, jump up to unlock. All that means is you push it up and then it unlocks the lever and you can adjust the steering column, but it says jump up, as if you're supposed to jump to unlock your steering column. I also like on the windshield wiper stock, this little dial at the end that you twist actually is accompanied by a blue line that shrinks or grows depending on exactly the speed of the wipers that you're looking for. Which is kind of bizarre instrumentation, but it's what they did. Actually, having variable speed wipers is kind of a nice feature. Like that clock in the gauge cluster and the tilt steering column, there were some niceties in this car. Another example, you had power mirrors, which is kind of a surprise. Wouldn't necessarily expect that on a utilitarian truck, but it was there. You also had cruise control, which you would turn on with a switch to the left of the steering column. You can see it here under the gauge cluster, but then you would adjust the rest of the cruise control with a series of switches on the turn signal stalk. You also had air conditioning, which wasn't always a given in this era for sort of basic vehicles like this, but it was here in this one, which was nice to see. And you had a tailgate window release. This little switch to the left of the steering wheel, a little arrow pointing to the right, you push that to the right and it popped open the rear glass in the tailgate, so someone walking up to the car, a kid after soccer practice, he could put his stuff in the cargo area. That's actually a surprisingly useful feature that a lot of cars from this era didn't have. To get into the tailgate of a lot of other cars, you actually had to turn off the ignition, take the key, walk around to the back, stick it in, open it, and then you could get inside. So having that feature added a real nicety. And another nice luxury touch was power windows. You can see dual power windows mounted here on the front door. The weird part is there are two separate window switches. Instead of putting like drivers on the left, passenger on the right, they put them next to each other, but they distinguish them with a completely different window switch. Driver has one and passenger has a totally different design for the other, and I guess that's how you were supposed to tell them apart. Interestingly, over on the passenger side, the window switch is mounted in this large plastic panel that says power window in no uncertain terms, so you knew exactly what it was that you were looking at. But, well, I jest, those features, the power windows, the tailgate release, etc., you can kind of start to see how, as utilitarian as this was, they were thinking, okay, maybe some regular people will be buying these, not just mountain men. And you kind of get the idea of the beginnings of the popular midsize SUV. Now, with that said, there are still a lot of very basic stripped down things in here, like, of course, the transmission. 5-speed manual. You do not see that in in any of today's modern family SUVs, and it has a big, ugly rubber boot at the bottom, which again, that's not something you'd see in any nice crossover now. Also, an interesting feature, you had high and low range for the four-wheel drive system, which was pretty cool. Again, something that you'd want if you were a mountain man in the 80s driving an SUV. Not as important today, but once again, basic utilitarian controlled by a big gear lever with a giant rubber boot mounted next to your regular transmission lever in the center. And speaking of the transmission situation in this vehicle, let's talk through some other interesting quirks. For one, you have this big transmission situation mounted in the middle here. You know what you don't have is cup holders. Again, kind of proving the basic nature of this car. Interestingly, on the dashboard to the right of the steering wheel, you get a little switch here that says interlock. And this switch would control whether you had to start the car with the clutch in place. In case you wanted to just get in or start it from the outside or something like that, you were climbing a hill and didn't want to maybe pop the clutch, you could press this button and then turn off the interlock that required the clutch to be pressed to start the car, which is kind of an interesting feature. Also interesting was a full description of how to operate the four-wheel drive system, which you can find on the back side of the driver's headrest. It is rather complicated with diagrams, images, a lot of words explaining how the four-wheel drive works. Over on the passenger headrest, you got a mirror. Not lighted, but a mirror nonetheless. Now, also interesting, over in the passenger side of the car, there's a little decal in the window that says Thermo Guard. I was wondering exactly what this is, so I popped into the glove box, cracked open the owner's manual pouch, and there is a full packet of paperwork from Thermo Guard explaining that the person who bought this car new had indeed opted for that extra add-on. I was reading further, and it's like a paint sealant that was intended to stop annoying rattle sounds. Can't imagine it actually did anything, but they sold it to this person, and whoever bought this car new definitely could have skipped that feature, considering that they only drove it 800 miles in 38 years. Now, as for the back seat, it's actually decently roomy. You fold forward one of the front seats and you can see there's pretty decent space back there. Like I mentioned, there was a four-door version of this original Pathfinder. There would have been even more space in the back of the four-door, but there's pretty decent space in the back of the two-door. I think Nissan figured if you were getting a Pathfinder, you were specifically not getting a Nissan truck, probably because you wanted this enclosed rear and back seats. And so they made sure the back seats were pretty useful and practical, even on the two-door model. Now, the back seat area does have some interesting items. For one, there's a little storage cubby over on the side, on both sides of the rear seat, where you could put stuff. The rear passengers also got, like I mentioned before, a window that opens. That weird little triangle window. By making a small window there, Nissan also created the ability for a little opening window, and it vents open. You can kind of push this little lever, the window opens a bit. It's not a lot, but it's enough to give you some ventilation, which would have been important for our next interesting rear seat quirk, and that is the ashtrays. You can see a little panel here. You push it, it pops open. You thinking cup holder? No, it's an ashtray, because of course the ashtrays in the 80s are far more important than cup holders, and you had to have one in the back. No rear cup holders, yes rear ashtrays, and that rear venting window for your cigarette ash and smoke, which also starts to make more sense. One other interesting rear item, you can see there's a little holder here for the center seatbelt buckle, which was actually kind of a nice touch. I remember as a kid always trying to root around to find that. It got stuck under the seat back. Well, here you just put it in its little home and it lives there, and it should be easy to find. And then there's the cargo area. Now, like I mentioned before, the tailgate can be opened in two different ways. You can twist your key to the right and open up just the glass, and you can kind of throw stuff in there without opening the whole thing. Of course, you can also open that glass with the switch I showed you inside, or you can twist your key to the left and that unlocks the full tailgate, and then you open it up. And you can see in the cargo area, there's a lot of space back here, a lot of big open space, unimpeded by hybrid batteries and all these things that came later, although it is quite clearly impeded by the spare tire, which you can see is stuck over here. It sort of looks like it's flopping around and back, just sort of leaned up against the the wall, but it's actually clipped into place. It's not moving, but it is stealing some of your cargo space. Now, this was a pretty big problem with SUVs in this era, the spare tire. You could try to stick it underneath the car, but then the tire would get rusty and road grime. There wasn't always space for it, and it was hard to get it out. You could stick it on the back in a swing-out tire cover, and a lot of SUVs did that, including the Pathfinder, where it was available as an option on the first and second generation models, but that added a lot of weight to the rear end of the car. You had to open up this complicated tire cover before the tailgate. It was not the best solution. The other option was to stick it in the cargo area, and a lot of automakers did that, including this. So you get a full-size spare, it's easy to access, but it steals some of your space. As for your tire changing tools, they're located behind this plastic panel over on the side next to the spare tire itself. The other interesting thing I noticed, looking at this cargo area, there's a lot of space for you to put stuff, and there is absolutely no hiding your stuff. There's no cargo cover, the windows aren't really tinted, you could clearly look right in. You would think that some people would buy this car instead of the Nissan truck because they wanted an enclosed space for their things, as opposed to a pickup that didn't have that, but indeed, still, it was enclosed, but it could easily be spotted and seen and smash and grab stolen. Anyway, let's talk about what came next for the Pathfinder. This was the original model and it went until the mid-90s. And in 96, the Pathfinder was fully redesigned and given still a body-on-frame platform. But now there were more luxury features, leather seats and a power sunroof. And it was becoming clear that a lot of people wanted SUVs for regular daily family use, not just utilitarian off-road stuff. Over the next years, the Pathfinder became gradually less trucky like this and more family-friendly. And today, it's a 3-row crossover with curtain airbags and ventilated seats. It's a long way, but you can't blame them because that's where the market is. And it happened to almost every other SUV. The Jeep Cherokee also went down that path. The Chevy Blazer, the Ford Explorer, they all became kind of unibody, simple suburb traffic crossovers. Because, let's be honest, that's what the people want. But in spite of that, in spite of those big changes, it is interesting to come back here and see the original thing, the old days of SUVs just as they were getting off the ground. Kind of interesting to check it out and see how it used to be at the start. And of course, interesting to get behind the wheel. And so even though this is pristine, untouched, I'm going to put on a few miles and see what the OG Pathfinder is like to drive. All right, driving the OG Pathfinder. Ah, man, I hate driving cars like this. I've driven them all, LaFerrari, F50, Bugatti. This car makes me more nervous than any of them. 854.3 original miles. And the thing about it is, this is the nicest first generation Pathfinder left in existence, period. I mean, maybe Nissan's got one in a museum in Japan. This is it. And so, like, it's not like driving a Bugatti Veyron where there's a few hundred of them and, you know, they're all, this is it. And it's not even a dent, you know, you Bugatti Veyron on a bumper, you fix it. This thing, any damage kind of screws up what makes this car actually special, which is that it is just the most unbelievably well-preserved. My family had an Isuzu Rodeo when I was a kid, 93, and this, obviously not the same car, but same era. And so this stuff looks it so reminds me of when I was a kid, but I mean, I haven't been in a car that was this clean, this nice since then. Like, I'm looking around thinking this is what life looked like when I was 6 years old in my mom's Rodeo, but that was 30 years ago. Like, this is incredible. Now, I will say, much like mom's Rodeo, this vehicle is a truck. Like, the early midsize SUVs definitely were not in the same kind of format as the ones that came later. This is obviously, it's body on frame, it's based on Nissan's pickup truck, so it is objectively a truck. But when you drive it, it's a truck. Like, this feels like a truck. The first gear is short, like you'd have like a stump puller kind of gear. The throws are long, but also you are sitting up tall, you are sitting up boxy. There are no swoopy, clean lines like in cars and even then crossovers that came later. Like, this is a boxy, utilitarian, tough truck. and that's what it's for. And that also translates to the driving experience. I remember my mom's rodeo was like this too, but every SUV from this era, the engine makes a lot of noise. It doesn't make a lot of go. And so you would just have a loud powertrain without a lot of acceleration to go along with it. That was just kind of the situation with these vehicles. This one is definitely peppier than my mom's old rodeo was. It is a two-door, so it's not so bad. It actually feels even peppier than like first gen and second gen 4Runners that I've driven. But it doesn't by any means feel fast or eager or potent or excited to go. Like, these were all kind of slow vehicles, and that includes this one. Then you have the issue of steering, which is an issue. There is body roll, there is vagueness, it is not planted, it does not feel solid on the road. Like, this is a truck. Like, I turn in the steering wheel multiple inches and not much happens. And of course, this is correct. Like, this isn't like this truck is extremely worn out. Like, this is how these were, based on the fact that, oh God, 855.6. It's just an old truck, you know, like it's just a truck. And that's what SUVs were back then. And that's one of the reasons that I think the Ford Explorer was so groundbreaking. Even though that too was based on a truck, there was less of a pretense of off-roading. How are the locking hubs? How's the low range? You know, that didn't exist. They finally started to get that these might sell to people who were interested in, you know, just cruising around the burbs. That idea hadn't yet come into Nissan's mind or anybody's mind when this came out. Man, it's just so like incredibly trucky that it's hard to even really describe compared to any sort of modern vehicle. And honestly, that was a benefit of it back then. People who were looking for SUVs were not interested in coddling family vehicles. They wanted something with off-road capability, because the only people who were buying SUVs, it was not common, the only people who were doing it were people who were trying to do something with it. You wouldn't buy one of these unless you had a property in the mountains, or you like to go hunting, or this or that. And this would deliver you there, but you got a tough truck, right? You got like a robust body on frame workhorse vehicle. You just didn't necessarily get a lot of luxury. And so that's the 1989 Nissan Pathfinder. This is incredible, so different from the mid-size SUVs of today, and a great look back in an era when the SUV was totally different from how it is now. This is truly a perfect example of an old school Pathfinder, amazing to experience, and you can buy it on Cars and Bids. Anyway, now it's time to give this Pathfinder a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 37 out of 100, which puts the Pathfinder here against some SUVs from this era. It earns the exact same score as the Ford Explorer of its day, though the Pathfinder wins in the weekend categories and loses in the daily scores. That makes sense, because the Pathfinder has a higher nostalgia factor and more capability, good for the weekend categories, but loses out in practicality and road manners to the more suburban, family-friendly Explorer. Both SUVs feel like they're from another era, though, and that's because they are, but they're very cool to experience through a modern lens.